Hello, everybody. This is yours truly, DJ Red Viking, aka Lieutenant Blueberry of the Archers. Right now, live via Skype, we have former LA police officer and acclaimed author Brian S. Bentley on the air. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
For people who this might be the first time hearing about you, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Well, I'm a former police officer. I was on the job for 10 years. That's the Los Angeles Police Department. I had a number of assignments, worked in South Central LA most of my career. What separates me from most of the other officers is that I'm one of the few officers who lived and actually worked in the division that I patrolled. And that was Southwest Division, which is right in the middle of South Central LA.
Now, what was it that sparked your interest in writing? Like, had you always been writing, or was it something that after you joined the police force, you started to write?
No, actually, it's something I've always wanted to do. I majored in communications and minored in journalism in college, and so it was something that I always knew I was going to do. As a police officer, though, I figured it would I would write a book at the end of my career. When I retired, I had this idea that I was going to write this large volume book and explain my whole career and talk about the things that you normally don't hear about on television.
I mean, you brought up talking about things you normally don't hear about on television. Say you met somebody that wanted to join the LA police force. Would you tell them to read your book? Like, do you think it would be important for them to read your book?
It's very important for them to read my book, but not only my book, but find out all the information they can about law enforcement, about different law enforcement agencies, because the recruiting posters, the recruiting brochures and pamphlets, they always focus on the positives of the job. They don't go into detail about the psychological effects that the job has on you, how that impacts your family, your friends, and just your whole well-being. And so it's important for anyone who's going into the field to just do their research and have an understanding of what they're getting into.
I've heard other officers that were part of the LA police force at the same time you were kind of likened it to like a war zone. I mean, do you find that you've seen some officers actually get what people would kind of compare to like post-traumatic stress disorder, like somebody like a soldier returning from Iraq or something like that?
Oh, that's definitely true. I have a number of police officer friends who have suffered long-term effects from seeing the different things on the job. Many of my friends have been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's basically from seeing the horrors on the street every day. I mean, there's something that happens tragically almost every day. Then there's the internal stress that you deal with from the department. You expect that if you're a police officer and giving your life to a job, you would think that that job would appreciate you. A lot of times, the police department doesn't appreciate what you do, and therefore that adds added stress. I mean, we expect to see it on the street, but you don't expect to deal with it internally.
For you personally, I mean, do you find like most officers, do they actually retire pretty young? Is it kind of like when you look at paramedics, most of them don't. They don't. It's pretty much just young guys that stay as paramedics very long just because of everything they have to deal with. Do most officers usually stay on the force for that long?
Well, the cool thing about that is when I first came on the department, which was in um, 1989, the retirement plan was you could stay 20 years and then you can get a full retirement. And a lot of officers went into the job because of that, because they could retire early. They can come in at 21 and retire at 41 and still have a career doing something else. But 6 months after I came on the job, they changed it where you have to stay 30 years in order to get your retirement. And 30 years of that kind of stress is very hard. And so a lot of guys are not making it. And under the old system, you could stick it out 20 years and come out okay. But now that 30 years is very difficult for officers to sustain that amount of stress for that long a period. And so you see old guys out there, 55, trying to chase down 19 and 18-year-old criminals. So it's very difficult.
You brought up like 55-year-old guy. Should a 55-year-old guy even be there chasing down somebody that's like 19, like in the prime of his life?
Well, unfortunately, the way law enforcement works, if you're an aggressive police officer and someone who really takes to heart their job, you're out there on the street and you're working patrol. And then once you're working patrol, you'll generate some personnel complaints. That's just something that happens. And when you're up for a promotion, the first thing they look at are the number of complaints that you have. If you work in a violent community like I did in South Central LA, you're going to have personnel complaints, you're going to have use of force reports. So that type of officer is not likely to promote. The officers that promote become captains and lieutenants are generally police officers who don't do much when they are patrol officers. So you do get these guys who are hardcore aggressive cops that can't promote. They have a hard time promoting. Some don't want to promote. But the thing is, yeah, you do get these old guys out there um, chasing these young guys. It happens.
As far as stress on the job and stuff like that, like what would you do? Like how would you decompress?
A number of ways. I was a very angry person when I was on the police department, very aggressive, short tempered, had a short fuse. Um, and so, it was really hard. And it was hard to separate that from work environment and also to separate that from my home environment. So, it was very difficult. And unlike a lot of officers drink. I know partners who, when I worked on the graveyard shift, guys would get drunk. We had these little cop bars that we would go to, and guys would get drunk taking shots and stuff at 6 a.m. in the morning, and that was the only way they could wind down was by drinking a case of beer. I don't drink, so my thing was I would work out. I used to work out about 3 times a day, run, lift weights, just do all kind of things just to try to alleviate that stress. It's really a tough job, and you have to find a way. I was very involved in my church, but you have to find something positive to try to alleviate that stress. And some officers turn to alcohol and drugs to do it. So you really have to be conscious of that when you become a police officer, or if you're dating or dealing with a police officer, you need to understand that.
Does the police force offer anything to help an officer decompress, or they just leave it all solely to the officer?
No, they do. They have a number of resources. They have a behavior science department, which has psychologists and psychiatrists. But the bad part about that is you don't want to go there because you don't want to have the label of being stressed out and being someone who's unable to deal with your problems yourself. It's a ego thing, and department looks down upon it if you're going to a psychologist and they find out, no one wants to work with you. So even though they do have the resources to help, the cops generally don't do it. I know from personal experience, no matter how depressed I was or how angry or whatever problems I thought I had, I would never go to seek a psychologist or seek any kind of professional help. I would just do it on my own. And the department also every police station has a workout, has a gym, and equipment like that. And you can always go to the police academy to work out. And that generally is the officer's preference as far as relieving stress and how to cope and how to deal with things. It's not always the right way, but they do provide that.
Given like the like kind of like renaissance in technology, how like anybody can just flip out their phone and start recording you, do you think that's a good thing, or do you think it just makes the job harder for a police officer?
Well, it's a good thing, but it doesn't make the job harder. There have always been technology out there. Before it was cell phones, people had video cameras. I mean, the Rodney King beating wasn't captured on a sophisticated cell phone. It was a video camera that somebody got out. The problem that we face now, that police officers face now, is that these cops are just too aggressive and they don't understand that you're not supposed to do those things in public. Actually, you're not supposed to do those things at all. But if you're one of these cops who is very aggressive, then you need to pick your spots. You can't just go out there and beat people during the day. All that stuff that you hear about still goes on. It just doesn't go on in the broad daylight. You talk to criminals, you talk to gang members, they'll tell you the same violence is still out there. It's just done late at night when most people are asleep, done in alleys, done in places that are not visible. The officers that are stupid enough to do it in broad daylight and in public, they're the ones that are getting caught, the ones that are showing the world what the police department is really about. But there's still that group of officers who are still getting dirty, who are still beating people, still aggressive, still physical. But it happens when you're asleep, 2, 3 in the morning. It's still going on.
Has the department changed that much from when you were serving in it, or do you think it's just the same problems that you had?
Well, police officers are always going to find a way to maintain that culture of violence, that them against us attitude, to preserve that LAPD history and that culture. They're always going to find a way. Of course, it's changed. It's changed dramatically since I was a police officer. And I'll give you an example. When I was a rookie, I was stationed at West LA Division. My first day, my training officer looked at me in the eye and he said, "Look, I don't believe blacks belong in this job. They're only here because of affirmative action. My job is not to train you, it's to fire you because you're only here because of affirmative action. So don't look for me to give you advice. I'm going to get your ass out of this job." That was his opening statement. I went to the captain and told my captain, "Hey, look, I think my training officer is racist." And my captain said, "Look, you don't think I know that? I've been on the job for 35 years. I know racist cops. Because what do you expect me to do about it? You want me to go tell the deputy chief? He knows that too. You want me to go tell Daryl Gates? Daryl Gates knows that as well." So, he basically said, "You know what, just get the hell out of my office." So that's how it was when I went through. Now, of course, they can't do that now. However, that same thought process is still there. A lot of cops believe that, a lot of white cops believe that black officers are only there because of diversity programs, and they believe that they have to weed them out early. Um, but you won't hear it vocalized, you won't hear it verbalized. So that thought process is still there, and there hasn't been anything to change it. People will argue that there are more black captains, more black lieutenants. There's only like when you say more, you're only talking about like one or two more than when I was on the job, and that doesn't change a person's perception. That only makes people angrier because they feel that black officers are now being promoted. Now they got on the job just because they were black. Now they're being promoted just because they're black. So that makes the sentiment even worse. So no, there's always going to be ways to preserve that culture, and of course, and to answer your question, things have changed on the outside, but on the inside, it's still the same.
How deeply embedded do you think racism is in the LAPD?
I don't think there are a lot of racist officers. The LAPD is just an extension of society. If you have racist people in Los Angeles or in our culture, you're going to have them on the department. If you have drug addicts in society, they're going to be on the police department. So it's an extension. Whatever you have in society, you're going to have on the police department. That's understandable, but the problem is once someone has been identified as being a racist, or identified as not just being a racist but harassing people because of something that they don't believe in. The problem is that the department uses its resources not to get rid of the person who's causing the problem, but to get rid of the person who's making the complaint, because the department wants to maintain that reputation that we don't have this stuff going on. So they'll do whatever they can to discredit a person who is calling it out. So instead of going after the racist officer or the sexist officer or just that mean officer who wants to get rid of everybody, they'll go after the person who's making the complaint. And that's where the problem lies.
Brought up the person getting like making the complaint, getting heat. Given that after you wrote your first book, you got a lot of heat upon yourself. Why did you decide to keep writing books?
Well, like I said, originally I was going to write a book when I retired. There was an officer that I worked with. His name was Kevin Gaines. And he was in the media. He was off duty. He was a black officer. He was off duty. And he came across a narcotic